I never loved you a single day in 30 years. You were just a convenient maid. Blurted out my husband at our anniversary party. Then his wife stood up and revealed a secret that made his sister drop her glass and left all the guests speechless. Maggie fumbled with her pearl clasp, the same damn necklace Rick had given her for their 25th. Funny how she still wore it to every family thing, like some kind of costume jewelry for playing the perfect wife. The bathroom mirror showed a woman who'd held up pretty well, all things considered. 50 wasn't ancient, even if Rick sometimes made jokes about her vintage charm when he thought she wasn't listening. Downstairs, the house buzzed with voices. Patricia's laugh cut through everything else. Rick's sister had shown up an hour early, supposedly to help, but really to snoop around and collect gossip material for her book club. Through the window, Maggie could see their backyard filling up with people from Rick's office, neighbors from Alameda Ridge, old friends from when the kids were small. She adjusted the necklace one more time. Showtime. Rick worked the room like he was campaigning for mayor. At 52, he still had that swagger that made other men want to do business with him, and made their wives giggle at his stories. Tonight he wore his lucky navy suit, the one he'd closed the Riverside development deal in last year. Maggie descended the stairs slowly, watching her husband gesture animatedly while describing some property acquisition to Bob from next door. Bob nodded along, probably understanding about half of what Rick was saying, but too polite to admit it. There's our beautiful hostess, Patricia, materialized beside the staircase, wineglass already half empty. Her cheeks were flushed, either from excitement or the Pinot Grigio, hard to tell which. The living room hummed with comfortable conversation. These were people who'd known them for years, who'd watched their kids grow up, who genuinely seemed happy to celebrate 30 years of marriage. Maggie, honey, you look absolutely radiant. Patricia gushed, swaying slightly. 30 years. Can you believe it? I never thought Ricky would stick with anything that long. You know how he gets bored. Maggie forced a smile. Patricia meant well, probably, but her comments always carried this weird edge, like she was perpetually surprised that Rick had settled for someone like Maggie. Across the room, their son Michael was showing pictures of the grandkids to anyone who'd look. His wife Sarah stood beside him, looking slightly overwhelmed by all the Portland socialites. They'd flown in from Seattle just for tonight, which still gave Maggie a warm feeling in her chest. Rick caught her eye from across the room and raised his glass. That familiar, charming smile spread across his face, the one that had won over clients and neighbors for 3 decades. Everyone, Rick's voice boomed over the chatter. He had that special tone he used for big announcements, the same one he'd used when announcing Michael's college acceptance or their vacation home purchase. The room quieted down, people turning expectantly toward Rick. Maggie positioned herself near the fireplace, hands clasped in front of her, already mentally preparing for one of his flowery speeches about lasting love and partnership. He was good at those, always made the other wives go aw and nudge their husbands meaningfully. But something felt different tonight. Rick's shoulders were tense, his smile looked forced. Even his posture seemed off. Less confident businessman, more something else. Something harder. Patricia paused mid-sip, her wineglass suspended as if she sensed a shift in the atmosphere. The room held that expectant hush that comes before big announcements. 30 years, Rick began, his voice carrying easily through the hushed room. 30 long years. The word long hung there weird, like it weighed more than it should. Maggie felt her stomach do this little flip. This wasn't how his anniversary speeches usually started. Usually, he opened with something about blessed years or wonderful decades together. People always ask me, Rick continued, scanning the room but avoiding Maggie's eyes. What's the secret to making a marriage last when so many others fall apart? The guests leaned in slightly, expecting some wisdom about compromise or communication or whatever marriage advice sounded good at dinner parties. Maggie's fingers tightened around each other. Something was wrong with the way Rick was looking at her, not with love or even mild affection, but with something that looked almost like contempt. Her heart started beating faster. The truth is, Rick's voice got louder, more confident, like he was hitting his stride in a sales pitch. I never loved you a single day in 30 years, Margaret. You were just a convenient maid. The words hit the room like a slap. Someone's fork clinked against a plate. Mrs. Henderson from across the street made this little gasping sound. Maggie felt all the blood drain from her face, her legs suddenly shaky underneath her. Around her, faces registered shock, confusion, horror. People looked back and forth between Rick and Maggie, like they were watching a car accident happen in slow motion. Patricia's wine glass slipped from her fingers. She caught it at the last second, red wine sloshing over her hand and onto her white blouse. Her mouth hung open, staring at her brother like she'd never seen him before. The silence stretched out forever. Maggie could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears, could feel the heat of embarrassment creeping up her neck. 30 years. 30 years of marriage reduced to this moment of public humiliation. Maggie stood there feeling every pair of eyes in the room on her, their expressions ranging from pity to shock to that uncomfortable fascination people get when witnessing someone else's disaster. She thought about their wedding day, Rick promising to love and cherish her till death do them part. She thought about all those years supporting his career, entertaining his clients, raising their kids while he traveled for business conferences. Every compromise, every sacrifice, every time she'd put his needs first, all of it dismissed as the work of hired help. Michael stepped forward, his face pale with anger. "Dad, what the hell?" But Maggie held up her hand, stopping her son mid-sentence. Something strange was happening inside her chest, not the crushing pain she expected, but this weird calm settling over the initial shock. She looked at Rick, really looked at him, and for maybe the first time in decades, she saw him clearly. Maggie straightened her shoulders and smoothed down her dress, automatic gestures from years of maintaining composure at social events. The room stayed frozen, everyone waiting to see how she'd respond to Rick's devastating announcement. "Well," she said, her voice surprisingly steady, "since we're sharing truths tonight." She paused, looking around at all the familiar faces, people who'd known them for years, who'd believed in their marriage probably more than she had lately. "I have something to share too." Her voice got stronger, more confident. Patricia's eyes went wide, the wine-stained glass forgotten in her hand. Rick's smug expression started to falter, like he sensed something he hadn't planned for. Maggie reached into her evening purse and pulled out a folded document. Her fingers were steady as she unfolded it slowly, deliberately. The paper made this crisp crinkling sound in the absolute silence. "This," Maggie said, holding up the document, "is a bank statement from an account Rick doesn't know exists." The words dropped into the silence like stones into still water. Rick's face went rigid, his earlier confidence evaporating like steam. "Margaret, what are you?" "For the past 15 years," she continued, her voice gaining power with each word, "I've been moving money from your business accounts. Small amounts, 100 here, 200 there. Amounts so tiny you'd never notice them missing from your precious real estate empire." The guests exchanged glances, unsure if they were witnessing a confession or a counterattack. Patricia's wineglass finally slipped from her numb fingers, exploding on the hardwood floor with a sharp crack that made several people jump. Rick's face had gone completely white. You couldn't. I monitor everything." "You monitor the big transactions, Rick. You never bothered with the small fees, the processing charges, the little costs that add up. Why would you? You had your convenient maid to handle those tedious details." Margaret turned to address the room, her bearing suddenly regal despite the chaos she was unleashing. Over 15 years, those small amounts grew considerably. Especially when invested wisely in stocks and bonds that someone as brilliant as Rick never bothered researching himself. Michael stared at his mother in amazement, seeing a side of her he'd never suspected existed. The other guests seemed caught between fascination and horror, watching the implosion of what they'd all believed was a solid marriage. Rick lunged forward, his face twisted with rage and panic. "You can't, that's theft, that's my money." "Actually," Margaret said calmly, "according to Oregon law, it's community property, and according to this statement, it's currently worth approximately $2.7 million. The number hit the room like another bombshell. $2.7 million. Patricia's legs gave out, and she sank into the nearest chair, her face ash-gray. She'd always known Rick was successful, but she'd never imagined Margaret possessed this level of financial sophistication. But wait, there's more, Margaret continued, reaching into her purse again. This time she produced another document, official, looking with a law firm's letterhead clearly visible. I filed for divorce yesterday. My attorney has already frozen all joint accounts and initiated proceedings to claim my half of all marital assets. Rick's real estate empire, built over decades of aggressive deals and careful networking, suddenly looked vulnerable. His clients were in this room, watching him get systematically dismantled by the woman he'd just dismissed as domestic help. The prenup, Rick started desperately. Was voided by your adultery, Margaret said matter-of-factly. Yes, Rick, I know about Jennifer from your Seattle office, and Amanda from the Portland branch, and that charming redhead from the Denver conference last spring. The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Several guests looked around uncomfortably, realizing they were witnessing something way beyond a simple marital spat. This was complete demolition, carefully planned and brutally executed. Rick's face cycled through emotions, rage, fear, desperation, finally settling on pleading panic. Margaret, please, we can work this out. These people don't need to hear. These people, Margaret interrupted, are the same friends and neighbors who've watched me play the perfect wife for 30 years. They've seen me host your business dinners, entertain your clients, smile graciously while you took credit for my contributions. I think they deserve to see the real Rick Hartwell. She turned to Patricia, who was still staring in shock from her chair. Your brother has been stealing money from your mother's trust fund for 5 years, Patty. The fund she set up for your kids' college, it's gone. Rick's been using it to finance his affair with Jennifer and pay for a second apartment in Seattle. Patricia's wine-stained hand flew to her mouth, tears filling her eyes. That can't be. But her voice lacked conviction. She was remembering things now, oddities in her mother's financial statements, discrepancies Rick had always explained away with complex business terms she hadn't understood. I have documentation, Patty. Bank transfers, forged signatures, the whole scheme. Rick's been gambling with family money for years, always confident he could replace it before anyone noticed. Rick made one last desperate attempt to regain control. You're all listening to a bitter, delusional woman. Margaret's clearly having some kind of breakdown. The breakdown, Margaret said quietly, happened 5 years ago when I discovered your first affair. That's when I realized I needed to protect myself from the man I'd trusted with my entire life. That's when I started planning. She looked around the room one final time, meeting the eyes of people who'd known her as Rick's quiet, supportive wife. The convenient maid has been paying attention, Rick. She's been learning, and she's been preparing for exactly this moment. Michael approached his mother, his expression mixing admiration with concern. Mom, are you sure about the legal implications of all this? Everything's handled, sweetheart. I've had excellent legal advice. Margaret's voice softened when addressing her son. Your father's attorney thinks he's very clever, but he's never dealt with someone who's had 5 years to prepare. Margaret gathered her purse and documents, her movements controlled and purposeful. I'll be staying at the Heathman Hotel downtown while the house gets appraised and divided. My attorney will contact yours, Rick, to arrange details. Guests began shifting uncomfortably, realizing the party was definitively over. Some looked sympathetic toward Margaret, others seemed stunned by the evening's revelations. A few of Rick's business associates were already calculating how this scandal might affect their own dealings with him. Rick stood frozen in his expensive suit, the confident businessman replaced by someone watching his carefully constructed life crumble in real time. One more thing, Margaret said, pausing near the living room entrance. Her voice commanded attention one final time. The house, Rick's business, the vacation property in Bend, all purchased with funds from accounts I helped manage. Oregon's community property laws are very clear about assets acquired during marriage. She smiled then, the first genuine smile she'd worn all evening. 30 years of being a convenient maid taught me exactly how this household operates, including the business. Patricia struggled to her feet, wine stains on her dress, tears streaking her face. Margaret, I had no idea about any of this, about what Rick said, about what he's done to our family. I know, Patty, you're not responsible for your brother's choices. Margaret's voice held no malice toward Rick's sister, only exhaustion and resolve. But you should check your mother's accounts first thing tomorrow morning. Call the bank. She walked toward the front door, her heels clicking confidently on the hardwood floor she'd mopped and polished countless times over 3 decades. Behind her, conversations erupted in hushed, urgent tones as guests processed what they'd witnessed. Some were already making polite excuses to leave, while others lingered, too fascinated by the drama to depart immediately. Rick remained standing in the center of his living room, surrounded by the wreckage of his public reputation. Patricia approached her brother, her face hard with grief and anger. "Is it true, Rick, about Mother's money?" Rick's silence was answer enough. Patricia turned away, gathering her purse and coat with sharp, angry movements. She paused at the door, looking back at the brother she thought she knew. 30 years, Rick, she gave you 30 years, and you destroyed it in 30 seconds. The front door closed behind both women with finality that seemed to echo through the stunned house. For a moment, nobody moved. Then conversations began again in whispers as the remaining guests tried to process what they'd witnessed. Rick's successful real estate career, his standing in the community, his family relationships, all damaged, possibly beyond repair, by his own cruel words and the methodical revenge they'd triggered. Outside, Margaret sat in her car in the driveway, hands steady on the steering wheel. Through the windows of her former home, she could see guests leaving, their anniversary party transformed into something none of them would ever forget. Her phone buzzed, a text from her attorney. "Everything filed and processed. You're free, Margaret." Free. The word felt strange and wonderful and terrifying all at once. At 50, she was starting over, but starting over with resources, dignity, and knowledge that she'd never again allow anyone to reduce her to convenient anything. Margaret started the engine and pulled out of the driveway without looking back at the house where Rick stood silhouetted in the window, finally understanding the true cost of his cruelty. Behind her, the lights of their former life grew smaller. Ahead, Portland stretched out with possibilities she'd forgotten existed. The convenient maid was gone. Margaret Hartwell had work to do. As she drove toward downtown, she thought about Jennifer from the Seattle office, probably sitting in that secret apartment right now, waiting for Rick to call with updates about his difficult wife. Margaret almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Tomorrow she'd start her new life. Tonight, she'd sleep better than she had in years. The pearl necklace lay on the passenger seat where she'd tossed it, catching streetlight through the window. 30 years of costume jewelry for playing the perfect wife. She'd never wear pearls again.